In this video, we're going to talk about how to make the puppet's head and hair. Start with a tinfoil filler. My piece is a little bit big, so you're going to see me compress it very tightly, but a piece about 8 inches by 8 inches is probably good enough for any of our purposes. Try to compress the tinfoil piece into the shape that you want for your head. In this case, I'm creating a human character, so I'm trying to get it pretty close to the shape of a human skull, where the top is kind of bulbous and round, and then we get thinner towards the chin area. Keep your tinfoil piece about 1/4 of an inch smaller all around than you actually want your head to be, because you're going to fill in that extra size with the clay that will go over it. I choose a color of clay that matches the felt on the fingers. I like to use polymer clay so that I can harden it by baking it and not have to worry about messing it up during animation. The different brands of polymer clay come at different hardnesses, so you're just going to have to experiment with the brand that you have and work with warming it up in your hands and kneading it so that it's soft and pliable. Take about 1/4 or 1/3 off of your lump of clay and then roll it into your hands in a ball, flatten it out, and you can use any type of roller. Here I've got a Sharpie marker. But roll over it to flatten it. This way you can pick it up and easily just wrap it around the tinfoil form to create your clay head. At this point you can just push, pinch, and pull to get the shape that you want around your head. Take extra pieces of clay from the little clump that you pulled off earlier to create a more symmetrical form around your face if you need to. Be careful that you don't use that entire clump because you're going to need it for the nose and the ears. I also smooth out my clay using my fingernail a lot. I've tried sculpting tools before, and I just feel like I personally don't have the control with the tools to do that. So I really like to use just my fingernails. Sometimes I'll use a popsicle stick or a butter knife or, other things that happen to be on hand, but my own hands seem to be my favorite tool personally. Here I take an awl, which is actually a bookmaker's tool, but it's very handy for poking holes in all kinds of hard surfaces. So in this one, I use it to poke the neck hole into the back of the head. Then I insert a stick as a handhold while I use the broad surface of the table to continue to smooth out fingerprints. Now I'll pinch off a small piece of clay from the bit that I set aside earlier, roll it into a ball, and pinch one end of it into a little point. This will be blended into the face later. Then on the other end, I'll mold it into the shape that I want the nose to be. At this point, I want to take a break and talk a little bit about facial proportions. We measure from the top of the head to the bottom of the head, the chin. Halfway between the top of the head and the bottom of the chin are the eyes. 1/3 of the way between the top of the head and the bottom of the chin are the eyebrows. And then if you measure from the eyebrows to the bottom of the chin, halfway between those, you get the nose. Between the bottom of the nose and the bottom of the chin, 1/3 of the way, you get the part in the lips. The most important measurement I want you to remember right now is the placement of the nose. Right now, using a popsicle stick, or really you can use any straight edge, I'm going to make very faint lines in the face for where I want to place these things. A line for the eyes, a line for the eyebrows, and then a line for the nose. Once I have my general placements marked, I'm going to go ahead and attach the nose. I'll use the back of my fingernail to blend in the bridge of the nose to the rest of the face, but you can use whatever tool makes you comfortable. Once I have the bridge of the nose completely blended into the face, I'll use my fingernail or my popsicle stick, whatever tool I'm using, to make a few last refining shape changes to the nose before I decide to make the marks for the ears. My eye and eyebrow lines have faded during handling of the sculpture, so I'm just reinforcing those so that I know where to measure my ears. The top of the ear is at the same height as the eyebrows, and the bottom of the ear is at the same height as the bottom of the nose. Then 2/3 of the way back from the front of the face, we put the ear. Now I'm going to pull 2 small pieces of clay and roll them up into tiny little balls and flatten them out to be ears. Just remember that the bottom of your ear is more narrow than the top, so pinch the bottom a little bit to make it more narrow on your ear. Then I attach it to the head and blend it in. Then repeat the same steps with the other ear, checking carefully the top and front of the head to make sure the placement is symmetrical. Make any last refinements, then bake the head according to the package directions. Please note that I don't add eyes or a mouth here because those are animatable pieces, and we'll add them in a different way later. We'll talk about short clay hair first. The brand of clay that I'm using here is harder, so I have to spend more time kneading it, warming it up in my hand, and sometimes under a desk lamp to get it to be nice and soft. Now that I've kneaded the clay, I've separated about a 1/3 piece for details later, and I'm going to roll it out into a nice flat circle to mold around the head for the initial piece of hair. Now you can just fold it over the head, pinching and pulling it into the shape that you want. Now that I've got the general shape for the hair that I want, I'm going to decide where the part is and just impress that in with my sculpting tools. I've decided that I want a somewhat spiky hairstyle, so I've pulled off 3 tiny little pieces that I'm going to roll into balls and then roll out into longer shapes that I'll pinch at the end to create little bangs. Here I'll use my tools to do just a little bit of blending in the places where it's needed, but I don't want to do so much blending that I lose the shape of the bangs. I've decided that I want to make his hair just a little more wild and give him a bit of a cowlick in the back, so I create 2 even smaller spikes just to stick in the back for a little extra character. Now I'll use a tool to add some mildly wavy lines and give the hair some texture. Alright, let's talk about how we make long hair using embroidery thread. I have here 2 strips of parchment paper about 6 inches wide, you'll see later in the video why, and 3 bunches of embroidery thread. The number of embroidery thread bunches that you need to create hair for your puppet really depends on how long you want your hair to be. I'm going to go a little past the shoulder length of the doll. This allows me to use my embroidery thread pretty efficiently, just cutting it at the end of the loop on both sides. If you want your hair to be longer, you can just get more embroidery thread bunches and cut only on one side. Now I'm going to measure the puppet's head for the longest length of hair that I'm going to need, from the center of one ear across the forehead to the center of the other. On this puppet, that comes out to be about 2.5 inches. Next, I'm going to mark it on my parchment paper so that when I lay my hair out, I know how wide it needs to be. I'm going to make 4 pieces of hair. 1 at the edge of the forehead, 1 at the back of the skull where it just starts to turn down, and 1 at the base of the skull. My last piece will be the bangs in the front. It's probably a good idea for a beginner to measure for each piece of hair. I've done this long enough that I'm just going to measure for the longest piece, and I've got a pretty good idea of how long the others will need to be. Now I'll take 2 bunches of thread and carefully spread them out across the measured marks. I'll pin one side at a time down with my fingers and comb the other side to make sure I get a nice even distribution. If I need to, I'll take just a little bit of thread from the other bunches to make sure I get the full width for this first piece of hair. Because I know each bunch of hair is going to be a little smaller than the previous, I'm not too worried about borrowing a few extra strands. Don't overdo it because you do want to make sure that you have enough for each bit. I need to have a cross thread for each piece of hair to give all of the little individual hairs something to hold on to when they're glued together. Right now, I'm measuring for the center of this bunch of hair where the glue will be. Next, I'm going to run a bead of hot glue down through the center and then lay my cross thread over the top of it. Now I'm going to very carefully fold the top half of the hair over the bottom half. I'll rub the crease flat and then let it sit there for a minute while the glue cools. Because I'm using a hot glue gun, this does require quite a bit of care not to burn yourself, as well as a certain amount of speed and accuracy. If you're more comfortable using a slower drying glue, make sure you use something flexible like fabric glue, and then you might just have to let it sit folded over overnight. Now I'll just run through the same process with the rest of the hair, making sure that each new piece is a little bit smaller than the previous one. Remember that if you're new to doing this, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and measure all of the different parts of the head that you're going to attach the hair to so that you know just how wide each piece actually needs to be. In order to avoid the appearance of any bald spots, I'm going to use a marker that's the same color as the embroidery thread to color the hairline of the scalp. It's a good idea to start with a pencil first. I just dove in with the marker and ended up with some kind of wonky lines. I was okay with it because ultimately the hair covered it, but I would recommend using a pencil that's easily erasable before you jump into something that's not quite so easily fixed. Now I'm just going to try the hair pieces on before I actually glue it and trim any parts that I need to trim and make adjustments here and there. Then we'll get into attaching it to the head. All right, just finishing up a last little trim, and then we're going to attach it to the bottom of the head first and work our way up. So here I put a bead of glue along the base of the head and then attach my second smallest piece of hair. The smallest piece is the bangs. All right, just trimming the sides off, and then I like to do test fits with every new step just to make sure everything's going along smoothly so that I don't end up diving in and have a result at the end that I really don't like. Okay, and now here's the bead of glue for the back of the head where it starts to turn down. And now a dry fit for the biggest piece that will cover everything. And now we'll go ahead and put our piece of glue right along the forehead where the bangs and the back of the hair will meet. It's a good idea when attaching your hair, especially the longest piece, if you start from one corner and work your way over to the other. If you start right in the middle, you might end up with one side too long and one side too short. The corner of my hair didn't adhere quite properly, so I just put a little dot of glue underneath it and fixed it. One last dry fit for the bangs to make sure that they look the way I want them to look, and then just a little bead of glue only where I want the bangs to go, not all the way across the head this time. Now I'm just going to mess with the hair a little bit, trimming here and there and making adjustments, deciding where I want to part it and what I want it to look like before I decide that it's finished.